There is a moment, quiet, hidden, almost impossible to confess, when even the strongest soul feels like it can no longer carry everything alone. The world expects strength, but your heart whispers exhaustion. You try to move forward, yet something inside you is collapsing under the weight of silent fears, unanswered questions, and battles no one sees. And it's right there, in that fragile place between fatigue and surrender, that an ancient invitation still echoes. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. This video begins where your strength ends. It exposes the invisible storm inside your mind and reveals what Jesus truly taught about the weight you were never meant to carry. It challenges the idea that faith means pretending to be unbreakable, and instead shows how surrender is not weakness, but spiritual wisdom. You will see why releasing your burdens is not an emotional escape, but a biblical command rooted in trust, humility, and healing. And as you follow the journey, you will understand how giving your burdens to Jesus is not poetry. It's a daily practice that reshapes your reactions, your thoughts, your relationships, and the way you walk through suffering. With a cinematic rhythm that moves from tension to revelation, this message will guide you through Jesus' call in Matthew 11:28, the strength promised in Psalm 55:22, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you, and the clarity of 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. These verses will not be presented as distant theology, but as practical steps to transform how you respond when life gets hard. You will learn what to do with the fear that wakes you at night, how to stop carrying guilt that God has already forgiven, and how to shift your internal dialogue from self-pressure to spiritual rest. You will discover routines that bring peace into your mornings, boundaries that free your mind throughout the day, and responses that align your heart with the rest Jesus promised. This video will not only comfort your emotions, it will retrain your behavior. And as the story unfolds, each new revelation will open a fresh emotional loop. Why do some people experience peace while others stay trapped in internal chaos? What did Jesus mean when he said his yoke is easy, Matthew 11:30? And what changes inside you when you finally stop carrying what was never yours to hold? By the time the synopsis closes, one truth becomes clear. Rest is not found by trying harder. It is found by trusting deeper. What comes next may change not only how you see your pain, but how you live through it. There are moments in life when your heart feels heavier than your hands can hold. You keep walking, you keep trying, you keep doing everything you can. But inside, something is quietly collapsing. The weight you carry doesn't make noise. No one sees it, but you feel it every second, in your mind, in your breath, in the way your soul tries to stay steady while everything inside you trembles. And maybe you've reached a point where you don't even ask for strength anymore. You just ask for relief. It's in this place, the place between exhaustion and surrender, that the voice of Jesus rises like a whisper that cuts through the noise. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. Not performance, not perfection, not religious pressure. Rest. The kind of rest that doesn't depend on circumstances, but comes from handing God the weight you've been holding alone for far too long. The kind of rest that begins the moment you decide to stop pretending you're the one carrying everything. Because here is a truth many people never learn. Before Jesus restores your strength, he invites you to release your burden. Before he lifts your life, he asks you to lay down what is crushing you inside. And what you are about to hear in this video is not just teaching, it is an invitation. An invitation to release fear, an invitation to stop carrying guilt, an invitation to breathe again, an invitation to discover what happens when you finally give to Jesus what has been draining your soul. So let me ask you something, gently, honestly, directly. What burden have you been carrying that Jesus never asked you to hold? Because once you identify the weight, You are finally ready to lay it down. When the weight becomes too heavy to carry alone. There comes a point in your journey where the weight you carry is no longer just a responsibility. It becomes a burden. Not because you failed, but because your soul was never meant to carry everything by yourself. And maybe you've noticed this in your own life. The heaviness doesn't always come from what's happening around you. It often comes from what's happening inside you. You wake up already tired. You walk through the day feeling like something is pressing on your chest. You pray, but your thoughts still race. You try to stay calm, but your heart keeps sinking. And even when you smile on the outside, your soul whispers, "I can't do this anymore." That's the silent storm Jesus was speaking to in Matthew 11:28. Not just physical exhaustion, but the deep internal kind. The kind that wears down your identity, your joy, your hope. The kind that makes you feel like you're carrying a mountain no one else can see. And here is the truth most people overlook. Burdens don't start on your shoulders, they start in your mind. Before your body gets tired, your thoughts get overwhelmed. Before your steps slow down, your heart grows weary. And as you try to keep everything together, something inside you begins to unravel. Now let's go deeper. What exactly is this burden Jesus is talking about? It's not just hardship. It's not just suffering. It's whatever weighs the soul down so heavily that it steals your ability to rest. For some, it's fear. For others, guilt. For others, the pressure to be strong for everyone around you. For many, it's the expectation that you must carry life alone. But Jesus does something extraordinary. He doesn't tell you to fix the burden. He tells you to bring it. He doesn't ask you to pretend you're fine. He asks you to come as you are. He doesn't tell you to become stronger. He tells you to lay down what is breaking you. That is the beginning of spiritual rest, not a change in circumstances, but a change in posture. Think about how you've been responding to your own heaviness. Do you hide it? Do you numb it? Do you ignore it? Do you push through until you break? Or do you bring it to Jesus, honestly, vulnerably, without excuses? Because here is a revelation many people never allow themselves to feel. Rest is not something you earn. It is something you receive. And you receive it when you let Jesus carry what your heart cannot. Look at what David says in Psalm 55:22. Cast your burden on the Lord, and He will sustain you. Not He might, not if you deserve it, He will. Because God sustains those who stop trying to carry what belongs in His hands. So let me ask you a question that begins your transformation. What are you holding that is slowly breaking you? What fear? What shame? What expectation? What memory? What responsibility that God never asked you to hold alone? Your answer to that question determines the next chapter of your healing. And here is your micro payoff. You don't overcome burdens by becoming stronger. You overcome them by becoming honest. Once you admit the weight, you are finally ready to release it. But there is something deeper Jesus wants you to understand. Something hidden inside His invitation. Something most people read but never truly see. And that deeper truth will change everything about how you carry your life from this moment forward. The moment you realize you were not created to carry everything. There is a turning point in every believer's life. A moment when you look at everything you've been carrying and suddenly realize, this weight was never mine to hold. And maybe you feel it now. That quiet awareness inside you that something about the way you've been living isn't sustainable anymore. Because no matter how strong you are, there comes a day when your soul whispers the truth your mind has been trying to ignore. You are exhausted because you are carrying what only Jesus can lift. This is where the transformation begins. Jesus never intended for you to live crushed by expectations, fears, or responsibilities that suffocate your peace. And if you pay attention to His words in Matthew 11:29, He reveals something most people skip. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Notice this carefully. Jesus does not offer rest without relationship. He doesn't say, "Give me your burden and walk away." He says, "Walk with me." Because rest is not a moment. Rest is a person. Rest is found when your steps align with His steps, when your pace aligns with His pace, when your soul finally stops fighting battles that never belong to you. But here is the tension you must face. How many times has your exhaustion come from trying to fix what only God can heal? How many nights did you lie awake trying to solve what Jesus was asking you to surrender? How many days have you spent trying to prove your worth when God already affirmed it at the cross? The weight increases not because you're weak, but because you're carrying it alone. Pause for a moment. Feel the truth of that. This is why Jesus doesn't just remove burdens, He replaces them. Your burden for His rest, your fear for His peace, your confusion for His clarity, your loneliness for His presence. And this exchange becomes real the moment you shift one simple behavior. You stop fighting alone and start walking with Him intentionally. This is where your daily routine changes. It's not about praying more hours. It's about praying with more honesty. It's not about pretending to be strong. It's about admitting when you're not. It's not about controlling everything. It's about trusting one who already sees the path ahead. When you start your morning handing Jesus the thoughts that usually overwhelm you, when you face your day refusing to carry guilt God has forgiven, when you catch yourself overthinking and choose to speak His promises instead, your inner world begins to shift. This is where Philippians 4:6-7 becomes alive in you. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is not theory. It is a pattern of living. And here is your micro payoff. Rest begins the moment you stop explaining your burden and start transferring it. But there is a deeper conflict still beating inside your soul. A reason why, even knowing this truth, you struggle to release what is hurting you. Something within you resists surrender. Something within you believes you must stay in control. Something within you fears what might happen if you truly let go. And that is where the real battle begins. Because before Jesus heals your heart, He addresses the lie that keeps you holding the burden. And that lie is what chapter 3 will finally expose. Why the human heart resists surrender. There is a moment in every believer's journey when the real conflict becomes impossible to hide. A person may know the promises of God, may hear the words of Jesus, may even quote Matthew 11:28, yet something inside them still tightens its grip on the burden. They feel the weight crushing their soul, but their hands refuse to let go. And this resistance doesn't come from lack of faith. It comes from a deeper, quieter lie that forms slowly over years of fear, responsibility, and survival. A lie that whispers to a weary heart, "If you don't carry this, everything will fall apart." For some people, that lie was planted in childhood, when they had no one to depend on. For others, it grew in seasons of loss, disappointment, or betrayal. And for many, it comes from the subtle pressure of trying to be strong for everyone else. So even when they listen to Jesus' invitation to rest, a part of them hesitates. Because surrender feels dangerous, letting go feels risky, rest feels unfamiliar. It's not that the person doesn't trust Jesus, they just don't trust themselves without control. This is where the rising tension begins. They want freedom, but fear losing control. They want peace, but fear vulnerability. They want rest, but fear what might surface if they stop running. So the burden stays, and the soul grows tired. From the outside, others may see a calm face, a responsible adult, a dedicated believer. But on the inside, something is cracking under the pressure of the weight they were never designed to carry. Their heart keeps whispering, "You're tired," but their mind keeps responding, "Keep going." Yet Jesus never asked anyone to keep going alone. Something powerful happens when this person begins to understand the deeper meaning of Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness doesn't mean inactivity. It means releasing control. It means admitting limits. It means trusting a God who doesn't break under pressure. But before this truth becomes transformation, the inner conflict must be exposed. They fear that surrender means failure. They fear that rest means weakness. They fear that giving everything to Jesus means losing something important: identity, safety, control. And yet every time they cling to the burden, something inside them whispers a gentle truth. The weight is getting heavier, not because God wants you to endure it, but because He is calling you to release it. Here lies the micro-revelation. A person cannot receive divine rest while protecting human control. Rest and control cannot coexist. One pushes the heart upward, the other drags the soul downward. And so a turning begins, slowly, quietly. The person realizes that the burden is not just heavy, it's shaping them in ways they never intended. It's altering their mood, their decisions, their relationships, their faith. They begin to see that carrying everything alone is not noble, it's destructive. This realization becomes their first step towards surrender. Not the act itself, but the awareness. I can't keep living like this. And that is where chapter 3 leaves them, standing in the tension between fear and freedom. They haven't surrendered yet, but something inside has begun to soften. The ground is shifting, the heart is awakening, the lie is cracking. And just when they think they understand the burden, something unexpected emerges. Because the real question is not why they carry so much. The real question is, what will happen to their life, their peace, and their identity the moment they finally let go? And that answer, the one that changes everything, begins in the next chapter. When you finally see what Jesus was really inviting you to do. There comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when something inside you begins to shift. You look at the weight you've been carrying, the tension you've been hiding, the exhaustion you've been denying, and suddenly the words of Jesus in Matthew 11:28 hit you differently. Not as a verse you memorized, not as a promise you admired, but as a personal invitation you can no longer ignore. For the first time, you realize Jesus wasn't asking you to survive. He was asking you to come, not to perform, not to pretend, not to prove anything, just come. And when you read His words again, they land deeper than before. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. You notice the order. Rest doesn't come first, your coming does. It's the choice to show up honestly, the choice to bring the weight instead of hiding it, the choice to trust His arms more than your own strength. And here is the revelation that begins to open your heart. Jesus is not asking you to drop the burden alone. He is asking you to drop it with Him. Because rest isn't found just by letting go. Rest is found by letting go into someone greater. This is where everything inside you begins to change. You start to see that the burden you carry isn't just heavy, it's loud. It speaks into your thoughts. It shapes your reactions. It directs your decisions. It drains your peace. And as you look closely, you begin to realize that your burden isn't made only of circumstances. It's made of beliefs. Beliefs about your worth, beliefs about your future, beliefs about your past, beliefs about responsibility, guilt, failure, pressure, and fear. Beliefs that Jesus never placed on you. And when Jesus invites you to come, He isn't inviting a perfect version of you. He is inviting the tired, messy, worried, overwhelmed version of you. The version you try to hide from the world. The version you hope no one sees. The version that whispers in the quiet moments, I can't keep going like this. But here is your micro payoff, the truth that begins to break the chains inside your heart. Jesus is not calling the strong, He is calling the honest. And honesty is the doorway to rest. Now something powerful begins to happen. As you dare to move closer to Him with your burden, you start to notice the contrast between your voice and His voice. Your voice says, "You must carry this alone." His voice says, "Give it to me." Your voice says, "If you let go, you'll lose control." His voice says, "If you let go, you'll find peace." Your voice says, "You don't deserve rest." His voice says, "My rest is a gift." And for the first time in a long time, you feel a flicker of hope, small, fragile, but unmistakably real. Because deep down, you start to believe that rest is not impossible for you. Rest is not for people who have everything figured out. Rest is not for saints who never stumble. Rest is for the weary. Rest is for the overwhelmed. Rest is for the ones who finally admit, "I need help." And that realization unlocks something inside you, a surrender that feels less like defeat and more like freedom. But there is still one question pressing against your heart, one that will determine how deeply this transformation goes. How do you actually hand your burden to Jesus in a way that changes your daily life? The answer isn't what most people think, and in the next chapter, that hidden truth is finally revealed. How a burden is actually released. There comes a moment when you finally realize that letting go is not just an idea, it's a decision. And it's at this point that many people stumble. They know Jesus said, "Come to me, and I will give you rest," Matthew 11:28. But they don't know how to translate that invitation into something practical, something real, something that actually changes the weight they feel inside. Maybe that's where you find yourself now. You want to give Jesus your burden, but you don't know how to release something that lives inside your thoughts. And then there are others, people who learn to survive by carrying everything alone, people who built their identity around being strong, people who don't know who they are without the burden they've been holding for years. To them, surrender feels like losing themselves. To you, surrender might feel like losing control. But here is where the truth becomes transformational. Giving your burden to Jesus does not start with your circumstances. It starts with your posture. It begins the moment you stop fighting the weight and start naming it, because what you refuse to name, you cannot release. Think about this for a moment. How many times have you prayed for God to take the burden, but you never actually put words to what the burden is? How often have you asked for peace without identifying the fear that steals it? How many times have you begged God for rest while protecting the very thing that exhausts you? Your micro-revelation here is simple and powerful. You cannot surrender what you are still hiding. That's why the first step is honesty before God. Raw, unfiltered, messy honesty. Not the prayers you think you're supposed to pray, not the spiritual language you think God prefers, but the truth of your heart, spoken the way your soul feels it. This is what David did in Psalm 62:8. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. Not whisper your heart, not polish your heart. Pour it out, all of it. But then something deeper happens, something that moves this from emotion into transformation. When you name your burden before Jesus, you are not just expressing pain. You are transferring ownership. You are saying, "This no longer belongs to me." You are saying, "I can't carry this, but you can." You are saying, "My strength has reached its limit. Your grace has not." And this is where the 3A Pessoa enters, revealing what many experience but few recognize. Some people reach this moment and feel afraid. Afraid of what will change once they let go. Afraid of losing the identity they built around their pain. Afraid of trusting someone they cannot see with a burden they have carried for years. But something beautiful happens when they finally dare to let go. The weight begins to shift. Not all at once, sometimes slowly, like a tight knot loosening one thread at a time. Their breathing becomes lighter. Their thoughts stop racing. Their heart stops bracing for impact. Because Jesus doesn't just take the burden, He fills the empty space it leaves behind. And that space becomes peace. That space becomes clarity. That space becomes rest for the soul. But here is the tension rising again. Even after surrendering once, life has a way of handing you new burdens, new fears, new responsibilities, new worries. So the question becomes, how do you develop a life where handing your burdens to Jesus is not a moment, but a rhythm? And it is this rhythm, this holy pattern, that will shape the rest of your journey. That's the mystery waiting in the next chapter. Learning the rhythm of surrender. There comes a point where you realize that giving your burden to Jesus is not something you do once. It's something you learn to do every day. Because life does not stop handing you new pressures, new responsibilities, new thoughts that weigh you down. And if you don't develop a rhythm of surrender, everything you released yesterday begins to creep back into your heart today. This is where Jesus' words in Matthew 11:29 become more than a promise. They become a pattern. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Not visit me. Not occasionally come to me. Learn from me. Which means rest is learned. Peace is learned. Surrender is learned. And you learn it by walking with Him intentionally, not emotionally. Here is where your transformation truly begins. When you stop treating surrender as an emergency prayer and start treating it as a daily posture. Think about your mornings. You wake up, and your mind already knows the path it usually takes. Worry, pressure, expectations, memories of yesterday, fear of tomorrow. But what if your first conscious act became this intentional sentence? Jesus, I give you what my heart cannot carry today. Imagine how that single choice would begin to rewire your thoughts. Imagine how it would interrupt the spiral before it starts. Imagine how it would shift the emotional atmosphere inside you. Because here is the truth you need to embrace. Surrender is not a feeling. Surrender is a practice. It's the moment you choose not to let anxiety make your decisions. It's the moment you refuse to let fear speak louder than God's promises. It's the moment you stop rehearsing what could go wrong and start declaring what God has already spoken. This is where Philippians 4:6-7 becomes a daily rhythm instead of an occasional reminder. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, present your requests to God. Not once, not when things collapse. In everything, you hand Him the thought before it becomes a storm. You hand Him the fear before it becomes a chain. You hand Him the pressure before it becomes a breakdown. This is what changes your emotional landscape. And here comes your micro payoff. The enemy attacks your mind, but Jesus strengthens your rhythm. Because a believer with rhythm becomes unshakable. Now let's go deeper. You start to notice patterns. Some days the weight returns quickly. Some days the peace comes slowly. Some days you feel strong, other days fragile. And instead of judging yourself, you begin to understand something sacred. Every time you bring the burden to Jesus, you are learning Him. Learning His pace, learning His heart, learning His gentleness, learning His rest. And as this rhythm builds, something powerful happens. You begin to trust Him not only with your struggles, but with yourself. You stop seeing Jesus as someone you run to only when you're drowning, and start seeing Him as someone who walks with you before the storm arrives. This shift is everything. Because when surrender becomes daily, peace becomes natural. When surrender becomes rhythm, rest becomes lifestyle. When surrender becomes instinct, your soul becomes steady. But there is a deeper dimension of surrender that Jesus teaches, one that most people never discover. A dimension that doesn't just remove burdens, it transforms the person who carried them. And that revelation begins in the next chapter, when the burden isn't what you think. There are moments when you tell God you're tired, but you can't explain why. You feel drained, heavy, overwhelmed. Yet nothing big seems to justify the weight inside you. And that's when Jesus begins to reveal something most people never notice. The burden you feel is not always the burden you carry. Sometimes the heaviest weight is not the problem itself, but the meaning you attach to it, the fear behind it, the expectation surrounding it, the voice inside you interpreting it. This is why Jesus says in Matthew 11:30, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." He wasn't denying that life hits hard. He was exposing that not all burdens are from Him and the ones that are never crush you. So let's walk into this with honesty. There are burdens you created by trying to be strong for everyone. There are burdens placed on you by people who never understood your heart. There are burdens born out of silence, years of swallowing emotions you never felt safe to express. And there are burdens you inherited from religious expectations that Jesus never asked you to carry. The weight you feel is often the collision of all these hidden things. And here comes your first micro payoff. What exhausts you is not the battle. It's fighting it alone. Because somewhere inside, you believed you had to prove something. Prove you're capable. Prove you're faithful. Prove you're strong. Prove you can endure. But Jesus never asked for that version of you. He asked for the honest one, the fragile one, the overwhelmed one, the one who says, "Lord, I can't carry this." This is why surrender is not weakness. Surrender is clarity. Let me show you a truth that might reshape how you see your own pain. The burden becomes heavier when you hide it, but the moment you expose it before God, it loses power. This is the spiritual principle behind 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you, not because you earned His care, not because you handled things well, but because you matter to Him in the middle of the chaos. Now let's deepen this, because this is where transformation begins. There is a burden you carry that isn't emotional. It's spiritual. The burden of trying to control outcomes. The burden of trying to avoid every mistake. The burden of trying to fix things that were never yours to fix. The burden of holding yourself to expectations God never placed on you. This is the silent storm that drains your strength. And Jesus confronts this storm not with rebuke, but with invitation. Come to me. Not figure it out first, not clean yourself up first, not pretend you're strong. Just come. This is Jesus dismantling the idea that you need to carry everything. This is Jesus exposing the lie that rest comes after you fix your life. This is Jesus teaching that rest comes when you bring Him your life as it is. Here is your second micro payoff. Peace is not the reward for solving your problems. Peace is the gift that helps you face them. But this raises a crucial question you need to confront. If Jesus promises rest, what is the barrier inside you that resists giving Him your burden? That question opens the next revelation, one that might expose the deepest root of your exhaustion. And that begins in the next chapter. When trust becomes the hardest part. There comes a moment in your journey with God when you realize something uncomfortable. You want rest, you pray for rest, you beg for rest, but part of you still doesn't trust that rest will come. And that's the part Jesus goes after. Because behind every burden you struggle to release, behind every fear you can't quiet, behind every prayer that feels stuck in your throat, there is a story inside you. A story that taught you to hold everything tight because letting go once cost you something. Maybe someone failed you. Maybe life disappointed you. Maybe you trusted a person, a promise, a leader, a system, and you walked away hurting, confused, or betrayed. And now, without even realizing it, that wound whispers into your faith, be careful. Don't trust too fast. Don't rest too deep. This is why surrender feels risky to you, not because Jesus is unsafe, but because your heart learned caution as survival. And here comes your first micro payoff. Your hesitation is not rebellion. It's a scar. Jesus knows that. He saw that scar the moment you came to Him tired. He felt the tremble in your faith when you whispered, "Take my burden." He noticed how part of you released the weight, while another part waited to grab it back out of fear. This is why his invitation in Matthew 11:28 is so gentle. Come to me, all you who are weary. He didn't say, come to me, all who trust perfectly, or come to me, all who have figured out how to let go. He said weary, because weariness is the doorway to trust. Now let's go deeper, because something profound is happening inside you. There is a tension between your desire to trust and your instinct to protect yourself. There is a part of you that wants to collapse into God's arms, and another part that keeps standing because resting feels unsafe. But here is the truth that might shift everything. Trust doesn't begin when you feel ready. Trust begins when you feel desperate, when the weight becomes too much, when your strength finally admits its limits, when your soul whispers, I can't keep carrying this alone. This is where Jesus meets you, not at the height of your faith, but at the edge of your endurance. The question you must face now is this: what part of you still believes you must handle everything by yourself? Is it fear of being disappointed again? Is it shame that makes you feel unworthy of help? Is it pride hidden under survival instincts? Is it the echo of religious voices that taught you to earn what Jesus already offers freely? Whatever it is, Jesus is not confronting you to expose your weakness. He is confronting you to heal your heart. And here comes your second micro payoff. You don't trust Jesus less because you love him less. You trust him less because you were hurt more. But healing begins when you name the fear instead of hiding it. Because once you can say, Lord, I want to trust you, but this part of me is scared, he can begin to touch the wound that shaped your beliefs. The next revelation is crucial. Until you understand why trust is hard, you will keep handing your burden to Jesus with one hand and pulling it back with the other. But once you uncover the real barrier, your surrender will become whole. And that discovery begins in the next chapter, where Jesus exposes the deepest layer of the burden, the voice that makes the burden heavier. There are seasons in your life when the weight you carry does not come from circumstances. It comes from a voice inside you, a voice that speaks quietly yet heavily, a voice that convinces you that you're not enough, not strong enough, not faithful enough, not worthy enough. And many people walk for years under that weight without realizing that the burden they feel isn't the burden Jesus spoke about. It's the burden created by an inner narrative shaped by fear, shame, and past wounds. When Jesus looks at someone carrying this invisible weight, he sees more than exhaustion. He sees the story behind it. He sees the moment that person began believing lies about themselves. He sees how disappointment became identity, how failure became worth, how silence became judgment. Maybe this person learned early in life that emotions were dangerous, or that their pain was an inconvenience, or that strength meant never asking for help. So they built a voice inside, not to guide them, but to protect them. A voice that says, don't trust too much, don't hope too deeply, don't rest too long. But that protective voice eventually becomes a prison. And here comes your first micro payoff. A burden becomes unbearable when the story inside you contradicts the truth God speaks over you. This is why Jesus' invitation in Matthew 11:28 is more than comfort. It is confrontation. He is not only calling you to lay down your burden, he is calling you to lay down the voice that created it. Look at the person who carries this weight. They wake up already tired. They second-guess every decision. They apologize for existing. They expect rejection even where love is offered. They feel guilty for resting and ashamed for needing peace. They serve God with sincerity, but live with an inner critic that never lets them feel worthy of his rest. If this sounds like you, it's because somewhere in your story, you absorbed a message that God never spoke. This is where Jesus steps into the narrative with truth that cuts through every lie. My yoke is easy and my burden is light, Matthew 11:30. Not because life is light, but because his voice is light. His truth is light. His grace is light. His compassion is light. The burden becomes light when the voice you listen to becomes His. Now let's go deeper, because this is the transformation you've been longing for. The heaviest part of your burden is not the responsibility you carry. It's the interpretation of it, the fear of failing, the pressure of perfection, the shame of not being enough. And Jesus wants to free you from a weight that religion often reinforces. The weight of believing rest must be earned. This is why surrender requires more than placing your burden at His feet. It requires exposing the voice that keeps putting it back on your shoulders. Here comes your second micro payoff. You cannot rest in Jesus while believing lies about yourself. Rest begins when you silence the voice that contradicts grace, when you refuse to partner with shame, when you stop treating fear as wisdom, when you stop calling exhaustion strength. There is someone in this chapter, maybe you, who has lived for years carrying expectations God never placed on them. And Jesus is not asking this person to try harder. He is asking them to hear Him differently. Because transformation doesn't begin with effort. Transformation begins with truth. And the truth Jesus reveals next touches the deepest part of the burden, the part that keeps you from believing you deserve rest at all. That revelation opens in the next chapter. The hidden belief that steals rest. There is a kind of burden that does not come from circumstances, pressure, or fear. It comes from a wound so deep that the person carrying it no longer questions it. They simply assume it's true. A wound that whispers again and again, "You don't deserve rest." And many walk with God sincerely, but silently believing this lie. This person could be anyone. Someone who prays with tears, yet feels unworthy of peace. Someone who serves others faithfully, yet never feels allowed to stop. Someone who carries shame from years ago, convinced that God forgives them, but still unsure if God truly wants them. This hidden belief shapes everything: how they pray, how they surrender, how they interpret Scripture, how they see Jesus, how they see themselves. It makes them hear Matthew 11:28. "Come to me, all you who are weary," not as an invitation, but as a challenge reserved for people holier than them. So they walk into God's presence cautiously, almost apologetically, as if rest were a privilege for others, not for them. And here comes the first micro payoff. A person who believes they don't deserve rest will always carry burdens God never asked them to carry. The barrier between you and the rest Jesus promised. At some point in your walk with God, you begin to realize something unsettling. The barrier between you and the rest Jesus promised isn't the size of your burden. It's the resistance inside your own heart. You want peace. You pray for peace. You cry for peace. But when rest finally approaches, something in you tightens. Something stiffens. Something holds back, as if rest were dangerous or premature or undeserved. And this is where Jesus begins to reveal the truth with loving precision. You are not just tired, you are guarded. Guarded because life taught you to be cautious. Guarded because people taught you to expect disappointment. Guarded because your past made rest feel unsafe. Guarded because vulnerability once cost you something you're still healing from. You don't resist rest because you lack faith. You resist rest because your heart learned survival before it learned surrender. And here comes your first micro payoff. You cannot receive rest while bracing for impact. Think about how you pray. You ask God to take your burden, but part of you keeps scanning the horizon for the next problem. You seek peace, but your thoughts remain in defense mode. You long for comfort, but your emotions stay armored. This constant internal tension drains you more than the burden itself. And Jesus sees it. This is why His invitation in Matthew 11:28-29 is layered with gentleness. "Come to me, and you will find rest for your souls." He is not just saying, "Give me your burden." He is saying, "Let me into the guarded places of your soul." The places where fear built walls. The places where memories shaped beliefs. The places where your heart whispers, "I'm afraid to trust again." So let's go deeper. Because transformation happens when you face the truth beneath the tension. There is a moment in every believer's life when God asks them not only to hand over the burden, but to hand over the control. Control is the real weight. Control is the real pressure. Control is the real exhaustion. And yet, you hold it because you think letting go means losing yourself. But Jesus knows something you haven't fully embraced yet. Letting go doesn't erase you. It restores you. Think about how many nights you've stayed awake trying to anticipate outcomes. Think about how many days you've carried responsibilities that were never yours alone. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to avoid another heartbreak, another failure, another disappointment. No wonder your soul feels overwhelmed. You've been living in a state of inner defense. But when Jesus invites you to rest, he invites you into something radical, to stop fighting battles that belong to him. And here comes your second micro payoff, one you need to let settle in your spirit. Rest is not what happens when life gets lighter. Rest is what happens when your grip gets softer. This is the moment your transformation deepens. This is where the barrier begins to crack. Because now you understand that the greatest obstacle between you and peace is not the storm outside of you, it's the tension inside of you. But there is one more layer, one more revelation, one more truth you must confront before full freedom becomes real. It is the truth about what happens inside your soul the moment you finally surrender completely. And that revelation begins in the next chapter. Look closely at this person's story. Somewhere in their past, they learned to survive by earning affection. They learned that value had to be proven. They learned that love could be withdrawn. And now, without realizing it, they relate to Jesus through the same filter. So when life becomes heavy, instead of laying their burden down, they try to compensate. They try harder. They push themselves. They pretend they're fine. Not because they want to, but because rest feels like a reward they haven't earned. This is the silent tragedy shaping their spiritual walk. But then Jesus speaks, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with gentleness strong enough to break the lie. My burden is light, Matthew 11:30. In other words, rest is not a reward. Rest is my gift. This truth confronts the deepest misconception inside them. Because the problem isn't that they don't love Jesus. The problem is that they don't believe Jesus could love them softly, tenderly, without conditions, without performance. This person has carried so much for so long that the idea of Jesus wanting to carry something for them feels foreign. And here comes the second micro payoff. You cannot step into rest while believing you must earn what grace already gives freely. So Jesus begins to touch the wound. He speaks to the version of them that feels unworthy, not with commands, but with compassion. Not with pressure, but with presence. Not with expectations, but with truth. And the truth he reveals is this: rest is not something they qualify for. Rest is something he offers because he knows the human soul cannot survive without it. Watch what begins to happen as this revelation sinks in. Their shoulders lower, their breathing shifts, their soul stops fighting for a moment. Because for the first time, they are beginning to believe something they never allowed themselves to trust. They are loved without conditions, and therefore, they are allowed to rest. But this awakening leads to the next question, the question that unlocks full transformation. If Jesus gives rest freely, what is stopping them from receiving it? The answer, and the breakthrough, begins in the next chapter. The moment your soul finally lets go. There comes a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when something inside you finally breaks, not in destruction, but in surrender. A moment when your soul whispers what your mouth was afraid to say. Jesus, I can't carry this anymore. And in that exact moment, everything begins to change. You don't feel lightning, you don't hear voices, you don't suddenly become strong, but something softer, deeper, holier begins to move inside you. Your soul lets go. All the pressure you've held in your chest begins to loosen. The thoughts that ran wild start to slow down. The fear that kept tightening your breath begins to lose its grip. And the burden you carried, the one that shaped your posture, your mind, your emotions, finally begins to fall from your hands. This is the spiritual mystery Jesus was pointing to in Matthew 11:28-30. Rest doesn't enter your life when your circumstances change. Rest enters when your soul stops resisting Him. And here comes your first micro payoff. You feel lighter, not because life became easy, but because you stopped carrying it alone. Surrender is not an emotional breakdown. It's a spiritual breakthrough. When you surrender, you're not giving up. You're giving in to the one who has been waiting to hold what has been crushing you. This is the moment your heart shifts from self-protection to divine protection, from control to trust, from exhaustion to presence. Let's go deeper, because what happens next is where true transformation begins. As your soul releases the weight, something profound takes its place. The gentleness of Jesus. He doesn't step in with pressure, He steps in with rest. He doesn't demand your strength. He fills you with His grace. He doesn't shame your weakness. He honors your honesty. Because Jesus never wanted the version of you that holds everything together. He wanted the version of you that finally lets Him hold you. This is why He says, "Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart." Gentleness is not what He gives. Gentleness is who He is. And here comes your second micro payoff. The moment you let go is the moment you realize Jesus was never asking for your perfection, only your permission. Permission to heal your heart, permission to calm your mind, permission to carry your burden, permission to restore what life broke inside you. But something even more beautiful happens in this sacred moment. You begin to feel safe again, safe to breathe, safe to rest, safe to trust, safe to be human. Because the soul finds rest not when it becomes stronger, but when it becomes willing to be held, willing to be taught, willing to be guided, willing to be loved. And now you reach the most powerful truth of this entire journey. Rest is not a place you arrive. Rest is a person you walk with. Jesus is not asking you to escape your life to find peace. He is asking you to walk with Him in your life so peace finds you. This is the transformation you've been moving toward. This is the moment your soul stops fighting its battles alone. This is the moment heaven becomes closer than your fear. And this leads us to the final part, the closing revelation, the prayer, and the invitation that seals everything God has been awakening inside you. The rest your soul has been waiting for. Now that you've walked through every layer of this journey, something in you has shifted. You're no longer the person who arrived carrying everything in silence. You're the person who finally understands that Jesus wasn't asking for your strength. He was offering His presence. And as you stand here, at the end of this message, your soul knows the truth. You were never meant to carry life alone. Every burden that felt too heavy, every fear that drained your courage, every pressure that shaped your thoughts, Jesus was already waiting to take them from your hands. This is where transformation becomes real. Not in the moment you understood the teaching, but in the moment you surrendered your heart. Because rest is not something you try to feel. Rest is something you receive. When you breathe slower tonight, when your thoughts soften, when your heart stops racing, when your soul stops fighting, that is Jesus doing what He promised in Matthew 11:28. That is His gentleness. That is His rest. That is His love reaching the places no one else sees. Now the question becomes, will you walk tomorrow the same way you lived yesterday? Or will you walk with the one who finally lifted the weight from your soul? Your life begins to change the moment you choose the second path. If this message touched you, breathe for a moment and let your heart say softly, "Jesus, I receive your rest." Let this be your new beginning. Let this be the night your soul learns to rest again. And before you go, If this word spoke to your spirit, subscribe, leave your like, activate the notifications, and share this message with someone who needs freedom as much as you do. Your small act can carry light into someone else's darkness. Jesus is calling you to rest. Now, take his hand.